After losing to the Florida Panthers in round 2, we have already seen so much drama and so many trade rumors surrounding the Toronto Maple Leafs and what they will do this upcoming offseason. But two names have gotten the most attention so far in William Nylander and Mitch Marner. But we're going to be breaking down every single piece of Leafs trade rumors over the past week, so watch till the end for the full breakdown and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this and more trade rumor content. You won't want to miss it. Now, after that second round loss to the Panthers where their top end of the lineup just completely didn't show up, and especially Marner, Tavares, and Matthews, and especially in the goal scoring department, there might be some major changes coming up to the Leafs this offseason. And even though the cap is a struggle for Toronto, trading a couple of guys here might be exactly what they need. But there's been all the questions of, do the Leafs move past guys? How much do they want to retool? Do they run it back? What should they end up doing? But it seems like most likely we will be seeing changes at the top. Now let's start with Mitch Marner here, and we're going to get into some rumors in a second here about how Mitch Marner potentially is the most likely of the core four to be moved. But you can see at age 26 and just what he's done over the regular seasons these past few years, just marvelous work. 97 points in 72 games last year, then 99 points in 80 games this season. And you can see in the playoffs, in terms of pure points, not too bad. 8 points in 7 games last year and 14 points in 11 games this year. But especially this season, a lot of those points kind of came in garbage time. There were a few blowouts the Leafs had, especially versus Tampa Bay, and Marner was a huge part of that. The stat padding was a huge part of things, and especially in the first few games, he was just racking the points up. But in that Florida series, it was not what it needed to be, and especially at his cap hit, was just horrible. And even though the effort was there, you can see in the 5 games versus Florida, he came up pretty big in that game 4 to keep the series alive. But before that, in the first 3 games, he had 1 assist for 1 point and was just not good enough, was just getting mauled by Panthers defenders, and there just wasn't that separation and those game-breaking moments that we'd seen from Marner, even in the Tampa Bay series at points. But it was just not a good series for him, and even though he showed up in the game 4, that game 5, you can see blank, 31 minutes, 0 points, not good enough. And even though Marner is still great to have, he makes $10.9 million. And even though the points on paper were good, coming up in the big moments was a consistent problem for Marner. Even when the Leafs were winning, there were still points where you wanted to see more out of him. It was more so maybe Matthews coming for or John Tavares with that game series winning goal. It wasn't Mitch Marner at the forefront most of the time. And again, considering the cap hit, it's just not good enough. And especially considering he's in his prime, it's just a consistent theme. And he's 26 years old, right in that prime, and it should be better. It should be more than this. When you're paying somebody $10.9 million, you need them to be elite every single shift. With Marner, you can't say that about his playoffs, and you can't say that about really many of his playoffs. He can get points, and again, last year had 8 points in 7 games, but it felt like that game-breaking skill, that game-breaking pace he had was attempted, but just never really translated in those bigger moments, and that's a problem for the Leafs, who, again, consistently have had problems in those bigger moments. And the question now is, will Mitch Marner ever be that type of playoff player? And that's the question Toronto needs to face, and that's really the question around most of these guys that they have, is if they will be better in the future, because that's all that matters now. If the Leafs blow it all up, obviously that could happen, but I think we'll most likely see a couple of these guys still stay at the very least, and we'll see a lot of tinkering around that. But will Mitch Marner be a player who rises above, gets to a Nikita Kucherov type of level? I'm not sure about that in terms of the intensity, in terms of the playoff style game. I'm not sure if Marner can reach that level. It's going to be a humongous decision Toronto needs to make, but again, considering the cap hit, that might be the player they sacrifice. And then you go on to what Pierre-Luc said about Mitch Marner and calling him the most likely player of the core four to be shipped. And this is from the Hockey Writers. Pierre-Luc of The Athletic writes that if Kyle Dubas is retained by the Toronto Maple Leafs as general manager, Dubas comments that he's ready to trade one of his core four means that Mitch Marner is the most likely to be shopped during this offseason. LeBrun cites the comments Dubas made about the Matthew Tkachuk trade to Florida and suggested that Marner is the easiest of all of the forwards to move because of his contract and how teams will be intrigued by the possibility of adding him. And in terms of what else he said, but what would entice the Leafs to move a player of Marner's immense talent? What would it take for them to consider it a franchise forwarding deal? To me, that's a deal that has to be at least netting a top pair defenseman. And he notes that if he doesn't see a particular player the Leafs might target, but noted that no one expected the Tkachuk trade to garner a return of Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, so anything is possible. Now, obviously, the Huberdeau and Weegar return and work out too well for Calgary at the start, but it seems like most likely we will see a Mitch Marner trade. And even though the cap hit is huge at $10.9 million, I do agree that still a lot of teams will be out there trying to get for him, especially since we've seen, of course, how much the cap will be rising over these next few years. I could see a team going after him, but again, his contract is a huge consistent theme, and it's a reason why the Leafs will probably end up trading him, is it's just too much to justify the playoff results. Will another team be comfortable bringing that on? We'll have to wait and see. I mean, of course, the points in the regular season could still justify that for a lot of teams, and they'll hope that maybe it could be better in the playoffs. But a Matthew Tkachuk type of deal could also be what we see here. But here's the thing that's interesting is that with Pierre-Luc mentioning that they get a top pair defenseman back, I don't know if that's the best move for the Leafs. At least if they're going to keep the defense the same. I feel like it was pretty solid throughout the playoffs. Like they were able to shut down players like Brandon Point and Nikita Kucherov pretty well, and they limited Florida's shot capacity pretty solidly throughout that series. I just thought at points, Ilya Samsonov didn't really come through as much as they needed him in that second round, and the scoring wasn't there. I mean, you look at what John Tavares did, you look at what Mitch Marner did, you look at what Auston Matthews were doing. None of these top end guys were getting the job done, and that's why the Leafs lost this series versus Florida. It was because of that lack of top end scoring. And you might have that top end scoring in the regular season, it did not translate to the second round, even if it did translate to the first. But to me, it wasn't really the defense that was the reason why they lost. In fact, it was probably the last reason why they lost. It was all right. It wasn't that bad, even though it could have been better, I guess. They still did the job, and the Leafs top end didn't get the job done. To me, if I'm a team like Toronto, I would kind of target a top end forward more than I target a top end defenseman, unless they're going to change so much about that defense, which I don't really see happening. But maybe they do. Giordano's getting older. They likely won't be able to keep Justin Hall around. Maybe they do end up going for a top end guy. I'm not sure. Maybe a more defensive style player. Maybe that's what we see. But all I know is that the top end scoring for the Leafs was the reason why they lost that game, that round two. It was inconsistent at best, and it was not there when they needed it, when it was in those close games, in those close moments. And players like Mitch Marner have a lot of blame for that. And to me, I would rather get a player that's going to score in those moments, have that top end scoring, than a top pair defenseman if I'm Toronto. But again, it just depends on their philosophy right now. But either way, yes, Marner would get a lot back, and you'd hope for at least a first line player, maybe a middle pair defenseman at least in a trade like that, just like the Flames were able to get in the Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar trade, at least on paper. And I think that could be what the Leafs target, especially again, considering that cap hit, they might want to spread it out a lot more within the roster. And then we move on to William Nylander, who kind of had the exact opposite problem of Mitch Marner in the playoffs, where the points weren't amazing, but the play and effort was consistently among the best among these forwards, in my opinion. At age 27, you can see what he did in the regular season, 87 points in 82 games, 40 goal season, not too shabby there. And in the playoffs, 10 points, 4 goals in 11 games, and especially in those last 3 games versus Florida, he was a point per game, had a couple of huge goals in game 4 and game 5, but it wasn't enough for the Leafs to make that next step, to get that bigger step forward. Nylander, again, was a player that came through at points, but was another player that didn't have the scoring when it was truly needed. And even though he would be a player I would keep around because of that cap hit isn't going to stay for much longer. Nylander will be a UFA after next season. He makes $6.9 million for this year and next, and that's a fantastic AAV for a player who got the goals and got the points that he did and still had the play that he did in the playoffs. But again, it's another situation where he might be a luxury that Toronto cannot afford, or can't afford to have at the top end of the lineup. But I would say for Nylander, he would be a player I'd keep so much more over a player like Marner, especially since he'd still probably cost a lot less even after his extension after next year. Now, you have some interesting tweets here from NHL Watcher paraphrasing Elliotte Friedman, and he said this. Friedman on 32 Thoughts podcast wonders about William Nylander. He says, anytime a player like him gets moved from the first unit to the second power play unit, I think it would bother them, especially in a career high year for points. Friedman wonders if Nylander feels like he will always be the fourth guy. Maybe try somewhere else where he will be the higher guy in the lineup. But then we have 2 giant quotes here from Jeff Merritt talking about William Nylander's situation, and he says this. If you make William Nylander available, I know a lot of Nylander haters won't want to hear this, there will be a huge market for William Nylander. The one that keeps popping out to me when I think about if the Leafs want to go to market with Nylander is the Colorado Avalanche. Then he continues saying this, you're telling me the Avalanche, where Landeskog is not playing next season and you have a whole bunch of questions about the future of Nichushkin, you're telling me that couldn't be a home for someone like Nylander and with their structure and with their leadership group. And I would absolutely agree with Jeff Merrick here that the Avalanche would be an incredible fit with Nylander, especially considering, of course, you have Landeskog there who will be injured. You can bring in another big Swede there. And I think Nylander would fit the Avs style pretty solidly. And as a finisher alongside Nathan McKinnon, it would be wonderful to watch that duo play. And I think the Avalanche would have the space to do it because of Landeskog being out, because of the uncertainty with Nichushkin. Trading for a big time forward might be what happens there. And we've heard rumors, and we've heard a lot of rumors in the past about Samuel Girard being a player the Avalanche want to trade and want to get out from under, and the Leafs, of course, needing big-time D. Girard, talent-wise, I mean, could be a top-4 defenseman, even if the results haven't quite been there, but that's a player that I could see the Leafs absolutely targeting here. And for the Leafs, if we're talking about cap space and wanting as much as possible, locking up Samuel Girard would be interesting because he is locked up for the next 4 seasons after these playoffs at $5 million. And if Girard plays to his talent level, that contract is pretty solid. He hasn't done that in Colorado, and even though his year was a little bit better this season, it was still kind of lackluster compared to what we were expecting, what we're wanting to see out of him. But the talent, the skating, and the pedigree is still there. And I think for the Leafs, that could be a player they definitely target, even though defensively, I don't think he's going to change much if that's for the best. He's not going to be that great. But I think for Toronto, that's the type of D-man they might want to target if a Nylander trade were to happen. Even a Mitch Marner trade if it were to happen. But it seems like John Tavares and his contract are safe, especially with the no-move clause, and it doesn't feel like Toronto's going to move Auston Matthews this season, so it feels like either Marner or Nylander, maybe even potentially both, could be dealt. I think most likely still it'll be William Nylander dealt just because his contract is going to be easier to get rid of than Mitch Marner's. Even if Marner's contract isn't the worst in the world, it's just a lot more, and it's going to be a lot more to get that contract off the books to a team wanting to acquire him. But I do feel like the Leafs are in order for some massive shakeups this offseason. We will see some massive changes. I don't think the Leafs are going to be allowing them to run it back and let that be acceptable. I just don't see that happening. So we're going to see some massive action here for Toronto, and it's going to be a doozy. Well, let's go down below. What do you guys think of the Leafs and the trade rumors surrounding them? Who do you think the Leafs should trade? Should they trade one of the top 4? Should they run it back? Should they trade Marner, a Nylander, a Matthews, or even to have John Tavares waive his no-move clause? Let us know down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell for more trade rumor breakdowns just like this, and share the video for all the hockey fans you guys know online, all the Leafs fans online, and click this card for all the trade rumor content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.